Hello and welcome to this round 12 of Pro Tour Amonkhet. I'm Tim Willoughby and we have a feature match area absolutely packed with talent here. We're going to get a quick turn around our feature match area. Sam Black is playing against Zen Takahashi. We'll be with their match soon enough. But in the meantime, we've got Gabriel Nassif playing Yoshii Fujita, kind of an old school Hall of Fame match going on there. And then Reid Duke against Steve Hatto of Luxembourg. Probably Luxembourg's most famous pro, though it must be said, not so many players from Luxembourg making it onto the Pro Tour just yet. And finally, we have Yu Chen Liu against Michael Majors. Many different teams in this feature match area and quite a few really interesting decks as well. We've got Yoshii Fujita, who is running a deck that is pretty singularly unique in the field, as is Sam Black. Really excited to see how these various decks play out. So let's kick things off. We're going to be starting things off with Reid Duke against Steve Hatto here, round 12 at Pro Tour Amonkhet. Hello and welcome to this round 12 of Pro Tour Amonkhet. I am Tim Willoughby, joined by Ian Duke, and we're starting off on kind of a cool looking match. Reid Duke, your brother, he's in the feature match area again, Ian. He's on Sultai Aetherworks Marvel, a very interesting looking list, up against Steve Hatto's Black-Green Energy.
Very cool.
We get a chance to see the players there. There is Steve Hatto from Luxembourg, a member of Team EUreka. He is going to be facing a slightly different breed of Aetherworks Marvel deck, where typically you would see Ulamog as the big payoff for the Aetherworks Marvel deck. What that is in Reid Duke's deck. He also has things like Demon of Dark Schemes to work with, though.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that. This deck looks really cool. I actually haven't seen the full deck list yet. Reid never tells me what he's playing before the Pro Tour. He's very secretive about it. But I have walked around the tables a little bit. I know Huey Jensen and Jelger Fagersmeyer are also playing this deck. And looking at it, it looks like a really sweet deck to me. It's kind of a mid-range deck, leveraging Aetherworks Marvel as a value card, more so than like a combo piece. And it looks a little bit similar to kind of a black-green Delirium type shell that we would have seen from a couple of standard seasons ago.
Yeah, we have the Travasve Elvenveld, we have the Ishkanar Graph Widow, but for now, a relatively straightforward start in Servant of the Conduit for Reid Duke. At this point, Steve Hatto, he may well not really realize quite what he's up against here, because this is a slightly unusual build, and that kind of the value of going a little bit off-piste when it comes to deck design. It may be that Steve Hatto here makes a misstep simply due to misassignment of role.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tim. I know this deck has shown up a little bit on Magic Online, but it's been, kind of in different variations. There's a lot of different ways to build it, and of course, it's hard to recognize exactly what deck you are in the early turns of Game 1 as well, so that information advantage could be a very real thing for Reid here in this Game 1.
Walking Ballista coming down early for Steve Hatto. Typically not something that you're super excited to be playing on turn 2. Obviously, the more mana you've got, the bigger it can be. If you happen to have a Winding Constrictor in play, you can make it all the larger. But if you can get it up to having 2 counters on it, it might be able to deal with an early threat coming from Reid. And it may simply be that he's seen energy happening on the other side of the table and knows that he could be in a race. Traverse the Elvenwald here for Reid. No Delirium yet, so it's just fetching up basics. Looks like Reid is playing with Ice Age basics back from around the time that you guys started playing.
Indeed, that's true. Those may be from my very first Ice Age starter deck back in 1995 or whatever it was. Who knows? So let's take a look at Reid's hand to just see a little bit of what he's up to here. He's got Yahenni Undying Partisan, Liliana Death's Majesty, Dissenter's Deliverance, not something super relevant in this matchup, although it could take out a Walking Ballista here or there, and Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, of course, to fuel his Aetherworks Marvel should he find one soon.
Yes, I mean, looking at that hand, it really does feel like this is the kind of the black-green value deck almost, rather than your traditional Aetherworks Marvel list. Be interesting to see how the next few turns plays out, where Reid wants to prioritize spending his mana in these early turns. Rishkar Prima Renegade here. That possibly one of the reasons that we saw an early Walking Ballista. Doesn't get to put an extra counter on that Walking Ballista, though, as we do see removal coming from Reid Duke to deal with it. before Rishkar resolves.
That's a really nice play for Reid there, actually getting to make good use out of his Druid's Deliverance there. Or sorry, Dissenter's Deliverance, rather. In that what would otherwise be a pretty dead card in this matchup. There's not a lot to hit with it. I mean, you can hit Verdurous Gearhulk or Walking Ballista, but sometimes a pretty awkward card. But that gave him a nice tempo advantage there, protecting the Servant of the Conduit and letting that Liliana come into play on turn 4, which is just a huge tempo swing for Reid there and really makes him kind of sitting pretty here on the battlefield.
Well, Liliana's Death's Majesties come into play, and we see the alternate way that Reid Duke might be able to get Ulamog into play. It's not just about spinning the wheel. Liliana Death's Majesty comes into play, starts off at 5 loyalty, going up to 6, creates a zombie token, puts 2 cards into the graveyard from library. -3, though, return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. The creature becomes a black zombie, so we may be seeing zombie Ulamog. I'm excited.
Yeah, really, really important to note there that he actually did mill in Ulamog with that Liliana +1, so really skillful play from Reid there to hit that Ulamog off the top of his library. And that could come into play next turn off of Liliana's -3. So we'll see what Steve Hatto has to say about that. Looks like a Bristling Hydra, which is a solid beater, but not anything that's really going to compete with an Ulamog as far as the battlefield is concerned.
Yeah, 3 energy available there with the Hydra means that it is largely safe from removal. It's going to be difficult for Reid to be able to deal with it while it has the potential to give itself hexproof with a little bit of energy. But in the meantime, he has bigger and better things to be thinking about for his turn. Doesn't even need to worry about the cards in hand, though it looks like he has drawn kind of a nice one here. There's a Noxious Gearhulk in hand in addition to everything else he's got going on in the graveyard and indeed in play.
Yeah, so stopping for a moment to talk more about Reid's deck, we've seen these cards like Liliana's Death's Majesty and Noxious Gearhulk in his deck. Those are emblematic of the difference between this and one of the more combo-oriented Aetherworks Marvel decks, where he actually has kind of these mid-speed threats that'll give him just kind of power to grind out a game and just play kind of a normal game of Magic with his opponents there. Also worth noting that Traverse the Ulvenwald with Delirium can search out a Noxious Gearhulk. But no time for that now. Here comes Ulamog, using Liliana's second ability to bring it back from the graveyard to the battlefield.
Nothing getting exiled here, of course, because it's not being cast, but as and when that Ulamog attacks, it will still be eating up Steve Hatto's library. And it may well be that this Woodweaver Puzzle Knot is the point where there's a real question mark for Steve, because prior to that, he could easily have said, well, this is kind of a value deck that's doing cool things. That Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, though, you really don't tend to see that without an Aetherworks Marvel somewhere in the 75. Hatto very much on the back foot here. I'm tempted to move along the advantage bar just a touch in Reid's favor here, as is so typical when Ulamog comes into play. The Luxembourg player having to figure out what he's meant to do about this exact problem.
Yeah, this seems really tough for the black-green deck to deal with, and he just goes ahead and scoops it up. I was going to say, there's not really that many meaningful ways for him to interact with Ulamog, and without being able to attack on the ground and punch through for damage, Reid is going to take game 1 here from Steve Hatto.
Big play there from Reid Duke. We will get to see more of that match soon enough, but first, here from round 12 of Pro Tour Amonkhet, these messages.
Rise among the worthy next weekend. Bring your best standard deck to become the Amonkhet Game Day champion of your local game store. Top finishers are awarded full art premium promo cards and an exclusive Game Day champion playmat for the winner. Find a game day near you at magic.wizards.com/gameday. Amonkhet is now available in Magic Duels. Build endless deck combinations with more than 1,300 unique cards. Play through hours of story with over 60 campaign missions. Play Magic Duels free today on Xbox One, Steam, iPad, and iPhone.
Hello and welcome back to this round 12 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by Reid Duke, and while our main match is just finishing off their sideboarding, we're going to get a chance to look in on some of our other magic going on in the feature match area. And I alluded earlier on to a matchup between two very much old school Hall of Famers, and we're going to get a chance to see some of that now. We have Gabriel Nassif against Yoshii Fujita. They're both still in game one, and while on the face of things you might look down at those lands and think, well, we've got a Mardu Vehicles mirror, it's actually not quite that straightforward. On the left of our screen, Gabriel Nassif is playing Mardu Vehicles, but Yoshii Fujita, in true Fujita fashion, has brought along something a little bit special in.
Yeah, we're calling this basically an exert deck. It is a variant on humans, sort of white weenie humans splashing red here for some new additions from Amonkhet. We have, Devoted Cropmate and Glory-Bound Initiate are two of the real highlights there from Amonkhet, and those play super, super well with Always Watching, which we can see on the battlefield there at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, so just to run through how Always Watching interacts, when all of your creatures have vigilance, yes, you can exert them, of course you can, however, they're not tapped when they're attacking, which means that the next turn you don't need to worry about the fact that they won't untap in order to be able to just keep exerting turn after turn. But as things stand, life total's still pretty high on both sides, and it has to be said that that must be in part down to the Glory-Bound Initiate on for Fujita. He's been able to gain life pretty consistently, I would imagine, with that. Devoted Cropmate being taken down there by Unlicensed Disintegration from Nassif, but a second copy of Always Watching now coming along for Yoshii Fujita. He might not have very many creatures in play, but the creature he's got is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think that Unlicensed Disintegration was just in the nick of time there for Gabe Nassif. The Devoted Cropmate, threatening to really take over the game in conjunction with Always Watching.
Yeah, each and every turn, getting back a creature with 2 power or less from the graveyard.
Yep.
Doesn't take long to rebuild a board, even in the face of a lot of removal.
In some ways, it's kind of like Fujita's own version of Gideon, in that each turn he's able to add another creature to the battlefield there. But as things stand here, I think Nassif is slightly favored here, but that could easily change. It's not a massive lead here if Fujita top decks a couple creatures in a row, especially with those double Always Watching there on the battlefield, that he could start to dominate things with just a bigger army.
Yeah, I got a chance to see a little bit of this deck yesterday when Fujita was in the feature match area playing against Frank Lepore. And what I was impressed by there was that even if the A plan of having Always Watching in play and exerting a lot isn't quite working out, this deck still has a lot of potency just simply playing the regular White Weenie plan. White Weenie was a deck that fell a little bit out of favor in Standard recently, but all of the tools are still there to just build a straightforward beatdown deck. As things stand, though, Gideon Ally of Zendikar making a lot of Night Ally tokens that Yoshii Fujita may struggle to power through with just the one creature.
This is pretty interesting stalemate here. Each turn, Gideon is making a 2/2 Night token, and Yoshii Fujita is attacking back with his exerted Glory-Bound Initiate. So Fujita's life total just keeps going up and up and up, whereas otherwise, things are more or less in a board stall here. It's really going to come down to which player can top deck the most gas quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the fact that Yoshii Fujita is so steadily gaining life, it means that this game could go on for quite some time. We'll give them maybe another draw step each just to see if they can break up what's going on here. But otherwise, it looks like our main match is about ready to go, and I am very intrigued to see what Reid Duke is going to be able to achieve with his very unusual Aetherworks Marvel deck after sideboarding. Thalia's Lieutenant coming down for Fujita there, making his Glory-Bound Initiate even bigger.
Things definitely swing in favor of Yoshii Fujita here. Just that life total is going to be a really big hurdle for Nassif to overcome here. Mardu Vehicles is good at dealing, moderate amounts of damage, but once you start talking about needing to deal 40, 50, 60 damage, the deck is not so good at that. And with double Always Watching, each creature that Fujita draws is going to be just a more powerful threat than what Nassif is drawing each turn.
Yeah, that Selfless Spirit can attack for 4 vigilance in the air. Big problems for Gabriel Nassif here. We know that Nassif is able to handle a long game, but you know what? I think that we should probably crack back to Reid Duke, because I'm very, very intrigued to see what he's going to be able to do against Steve Hatto after sideboarding here.
Hey, no complaints from me. I'm eager to go back and watch Reid as well.
Some good old-fashioned, unbiased coverage here. Ian Duke in the booth.
I
Reid
usually
Duke
do a pretty good job
on the table. I would say so. Well, let's see what we've got going on here, though. A drawn Ulamog, not exactly what Reid Duke is going to be wanting here, but he does have a tune with Ether to at least make sure that his lands are in the right place early doors, which is to say initially in his hand and then right on into play. Etherworks Marvel already in hand for Reid Duke as well, just getting things all updated as this game kicks off.
Yeah, definitely not an outstanding hand for Reid if that is a fully updated hand for him there. You know, he's got a couple of tunes to get him up to 4 energy and make sure he's hitting his land drops, but that Ulamog is going to be stranded in hand, obviously, for quite some time, and Etherworks Marvel without another energy source is not going to do too much on its own. Now, Reid still has, 3 or 4 draw steps to put together some way to produce energy for the Marvel. A Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot would be ideal for him here. But if he doesn't come up with that soon, then we could definitely see things getting out of hand from Steve Hatto's side of the battlefield.
Yeah, for much of the game, in hand is basically the worst place for Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger to be. We've already seen that even in the graveyard works out okay for Reid Duke's deck because he does have access to creatures from the graveyard thanks to Liliana Death's Majesty. As things stand, though, he's up to 4 energy. These Attune with Ethers doing good work, and a Tireless Tracker, a fantastic draw when you have as many lands in hand as Puzzle Quest member Reid Duke.
Now, let's take a look at what Steve Hatto has in hand here. He's also off to a bit of a slow start here. Looks like he has access to turn 3 play, either Tireless Tracker or Rishkar. Likely the Tireless Tracker, I would imagine. And then he's going to start curving out from there with Bristling Hydra and Sky Sovereign. So it's really going to come down to what Reid can put together in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 turns. And if he doesn't get something going really quickly, then, yeah, Steve Hatto is really going to put the beat-down pressure on him here. So it comes out with Ethersphere Harvester first, makes a lot of sense because that'll sort of give his next creature pseudo-haste in a way, able to crew the Harvester right away as soon as it enters the battlefield.
A relatively quiet turn there for Duke in just casting the Tireless Tracker. I mean, one good thing for him in terms of getting extra energy, once he has Etherworks Marvel in play, the clues generated by that Tireless Tracker will, when sacrificed, generate still further energy. And while Hatto is busily generating quite a bit of energy here, the most ways that he's using it in the short term are simply giving lifelink to his Ethersphere Harvester, and that not necessarily quite as exciting as slamming down on Ulamog.
And we may see Steve adding a Tireless Tracker of his own this turn, getting in there with the Ethersphere Harvester. Other options include Rishkar, but that doesn't work out quite the way you'd want it to with Ethersphere Harvester because he has to put the trigger on the stack immediately on entering the battlefield before the Harvester is actually a creature. So for that reason, he goes with the Tireless Tracker first. That'll make his Rishkar more powerful in future turns.
Swings in here and does use that energy in order to grant lifelink. So that means that the life total's very much going in Steve Hatto's favor here. A little early maybe to move the advantage bar too much, but there's certainly plenty going on for each of these players. It's going to be a matter of where things go in the next turn or so to really let someone make their mark on this game.
Make an energy and a clue.
Reid's hand looking a little short here on things to do. He'll go ahead and add the Etherworks Marvel here. It is a sort of naked Etherworks Marvel, if you want to think of it that way, with not enough energy to activate it right away.
Yeah, I mean, against this sort of deck after sideboarding, you would expect there to be various ways of dealing with artifacts. Whether or not that's Manglehorn, that's certainly a popular choice for many decks. It looks like in terms of what Steve Hatto's got going on, he's maybe gone a little bit lighter on ways of dealing with artifacts than some of the lists that we've seen. We'll see whether or not that ends up hurting him.
Yeah, artifact removal not super effective against Reid's version of the deck because, under most circumstances, Etherworks Marvel is still going to get 1 activation, even if you kill it right away. You can, for example, play a Manglehorn the turn before you think your opponent might play an Etherworks Marvel so that it enters the battlefield tapped. But there are a lot of draws where things work out that artifact removal isn't super effective, especially if Reid just ends up playing a kind of more grindy mid-range game. But here it is on Steve Hatto's turn. He's looking at adding maybe a Rishkar to the battlefield. bolstering up his creatures with some +1/+1 counters. And, you know, Steve's very much just the beatdown deck in this matchup here. He doesn't have a lot of great ways to interact with Reid's more powerful late game. And so he just wants to punch through for a bunch of damage, put Reid under as much pressure as possible, as early as possible, and just kind of hope that's good enough. And this game, it's looking like it might be good enough. I've moved the advantage bar a little bit in favor of Steve Hatto, but bear in mind that could switch back very easily depending on what Reid's next couple draws are.
Yeah, I mean, even cracking the clue will get him up to 6 energy, and at that point, I mean, as soon as that Aetherworks Marvel spins, advantage bars can point in more or less any direction afterwards.
That would actually be a great graphic, Tim, if we just, when someone tapped their Aetherworks Marvel, the advantage bar just starts spinning around and around like a clock.
Maybe next show. Winding Constrictor coming down here for Steve Hatto. No extra counters being put onto anything just yet, but as and when they do, and that includes energy, of course, there will be an extra 1 being thrown around. Interesting the way that the Winding Constrictor interacts with a lot of what's going on in Kaladesh, where the counters that are being thrown around are -1, -1. It cuts both ways, the Winding Constrictor.
So Reid here has picked up a Rogue Refiner. Not a bad pickup for him. It's going to give him a little bit of extra energy as well as another card draw.
Yeah, while there aren't very many blue spells, at least in the main deck for Reid Duke, he does have access to that Rogue Refiner, which is just a very, very efficient creature. And if we're describing this as a value deck, it's hard to say that the Rogue Refiner doesn't represent all of those ideals.
Now, the trouble here for Reid is, even though he'll be able to set up for an Aetherworks Marvel activation this turn, he has one of his 2 copies of Ulamog in his hand right now, which means his chances of hitting another Ulamog specifically are really low. And he's far enough behind on the board that he really needs a high-impact activation from Aetherworks Marvel this turn, or, you know, probably next turn at latest. So he's going to be looking for, obviously, the other Ulamog that he has there, but other things that would be great would be like Noxious Gearhulk, for example, maybe Liliana's Death Majesty.
I mean, even something like Yeheni's Expertise would be kind of interesting here.
Yeah, it sure would. The other card he's got in the spicy kind of 2 of here is Demon of Dark Schemes, which is a card we haven't really seen in Standard at all up until this point, but definitely a powerful creature, you know, capable of sweeping the board, although not this board in particular, as Steve Hatto's creatures all have at least 3 toughness, but you know, still something powerful that he could marvel into.
And of course, marveling into it may also mean that he can get a cheeky block in there and finish off something that otherwise might have managed to make it on through.
It's also interesting that you can even kill your own creatures with Demon of Dark Schemes just to keep on fueling the Aetherworks Marvel. You'd actually get 2 energy per creature that dies, 1 from the Demon and 1 from the Aetherworks Marvel itself. So a great way to fuel repeated activations of Marvel turn after turn.
Yeah, Demon of Dark Schemes and Aetherworks Marvel actually do combine up very nicely. At some point, you might find that you're spending the energy on stealing creatures out of your opponent's graveyard rather than activating the Marvel. But one way or another, they both kind of, they work with the same kind of fuel.
Okay, the results.
Plenty more energy there from the Bristling Hydra coming from Steve Hatto. 26 life, 7 energy, plenty of creatures on the battlefield, presenting a lot of different threats to Reid Duke here.
Okay.
So you can see Reid being patient here with his Aetherworks Marvel, just holding on to the last possible moment to activate it. That may actually work out well for him here, given that Steve played a pre-combat Bristling Hydra. He's tapped out on mana, used the Hydra to activate the Aethersphere Harvester and is attacking there. So now Reid has the option to just Aetherworks Marvel, and depending on what he sees, you know, he could maybe set up a block with Demon of Dark Schemes. You know, obviously if it's Ulamog, that's super awesome for him as well. But here he goes ahead and taps it. I'm ready to switch the advantage bar, Tim, at a moment's notice.
It could go in either direction. Well, it's not going to go any further for Steve Hatto right now, but it could definitely head in Reid Duke's direction right now. I guess that the downside of activating in Steve's turn rather than Reid simply doing it in his own main phase is that if he hits something like Liliana Death's Majesty, it doesn't get used immediately. And a relatively low impact Aetherworks Marvel, it must be said, Fatal Push costing 6 energy rather than 1 black mana does, you know, get to kill off a creature, but I think that Reid would have been hoping for a little more.
Even so, not a bad turn cycle from Reid's perspective, all in all, in that, you know, he only took 3 damage from the Harvester. He's still at a reasonable life total, and he's going to get to untap and, you know, hopefully, from his standpoint, activate that Aetherworks Marvel a second time and get another chance. Oh, but is that Dissenter's Deliverance there?
Yeah, there's exactly one copy of Dissenter's Deliverance in Steve Hatto's deck. He drew it. He's got one extra in the sideboard, actually, so one of two. He's found it. He's managed to deal with that Marvel. But look at the pickup there for Reid Duke, just immediately finding another one. It does mean that he's not going to be able to use clues to generate energy and activate a Marvel this turn, I don't think.
And for those wondering how Steve was able to cast Dissenter's Deliverance after tapping out his lands for the Bristling Hydra, he actually used Rishkar's special ability there to tap the 2 creatures with +1/+1 counters for green mana and go ahead with that Dissenter's Deliverance.
Sneaky play there from Rishkar. Sometimes an accelerant, often a beatdown machine.
But Reid adds a second copy of Aetherworks Marvel, which I believe was his draw for the turn there.
Sometimes you just have it.
Puts him in a spot, I think, unable to activate the Marvel this turn. He can sacrifice a clue for an energy. Depending on how Steve attacks, he may be able to chump block for another energy there as well. But right now, sitting at 4 energy is Reid.
Now on 11 life, Reid doesn't need to be too afraid about actually losing the game this turn. It's just more a matter of it's not going to take that many turns here for Steve to turn things around.
Okay. No blocks. 8.
Hatto electing not to use any energy. Multiples of 3 kind of valuable right now with Bristling Hydra in play.
Now, taking a look at Steve's hand, it looks like he's considering the options. He could cast Sky Sovereign from his hand there using that Tireless Tracker's +1/+1 counter to tap for green. Looks like that's what he's going for here, but he does have to be a little careful because if he kills one of Reid's creatures, that's going to give Reid an energy. Sacrificing a clue is going to give another energy, and that'll put Reid up to 6 energy, so he could actually use the Marvel this turn, which might let him untap and use it again next turn potentially. But he does decide that taking out that Tireless Tracker is worth it now, and that makes a lot of sense to me. The longer that Tireless Tracker stays on the battlefield, the more Reid's just going to draw more cards, and eventually he'll get out of range of the Sky Sovereign anyway. So this is kind of the last opportunity to take it out.
Little smile there from Steve as he sees the Tireless Tracker going to the graveyard. We'll find out whether or not that smile stays around in a mere moment. All the energy being spent once again, and top 6 cards. Let's see if Reid can find something
I
special.
think I may have seen an Ulamog there. Yep, sure enough.
Target.
All right, I think it's safe to reconsider our advantage bar situation just a little bit. Not going to put it
I'm going to put it in the middle for now till we see what Reid's targets, and then we'll reevaluate from there. Now, do note that the Bristling Hydra has shields up as far as energy is concerned. I think things now swaying in Reid's direction here now that he's taken out that Aethersphere Harvester and the Sky Sovereign. There are no flying attackers left on Steve's side of the battlefield, and Reid's got a pretty decent ground defense here. I mean, not only the Ulamog himself, which could theoretically choose to stay on defense, though I think is probably going to go ahead and attack anyway, but just all these random jump blockers here, like the Rogue Refiner and Servant of the Conduit. Reid doesn't really need anymore. So all Reid needs to do now is just kind of jump in with Ulamog a couple times here. Even the exiling 20 cards could be relevant here. It prevents Steve from having a game plan of chump blocking a bunch in a row. And, backing that up, Reid can just continue cracking clues, continue throwing random mana dorks and utility creatures in the way. And, things are looking pretty good for Reid here, I think, from this point.
We've got a score update from one of our other tables. Yoshii Fujita was able to defeat Gabriel Nassif 2 games in a row. So he advances now to 9-3. Team Last Samurai doing all right here at Pro Tour Amonkhet.
The real question is how much life did Fujita have when he won that game?
Enough. More than 0.
Spider tokens.
Ishkanar coming along. There is Delirium. We've got Artifact Creature, Instant and Sorcery in the graveyard. So she brings with her 3 Spider tokens. And if we're looking at doors being closed on Steve Hatto here, that one's fairly been slammed in his face.
Yeah, as things stood, a huge advantage for Reid now. There's not much I can think of in Steve Hatto's deck that'll get him back out of this. His deck is very much focused on getting an early board presence, having big creatures early, and he sacrifices the ability to interact and have a strong late game in order to do that. So now that we're in the phase of the game where Reid's deck is really humming and he's got a lot of blockers and he's still at a reasonable life total, he's not going to get Walking Ballista'd out of the game, for example. Things looking very, very good for Reid Duke here.
I like the fact there that Reid, even though he's in this commanding position, took the time to go through the cards that have been exiled by Ulamog and just make sure that he understands what Steve Hatto has going on. Even if it doesn't work out that it's for this game, it gives him information for perhaps if Steve puts a run together in the next few rounds and plays against either one of his teammates or, Reid again in top 8 of this event.
Yeah, or even if Reid just plays against another different black-green deck in the tournament, it might give him an idea of, how black-green players have prepared for this tournament, what sideboard cards they may be bringing in against him, and so on and so forth.
Hatto here checking through what's already been exiled, maybe trying to figure out whether or not it's worth it actually letting Duke see another 20 cards.
This is not quite lethal here, going to leave Steve with roughly 8 cards left in his library. But it will mean that next attack from Ulamog is going to seal out the game. So if Steve is going to do anything, it's really going to hinge on his next draw step here.
Now, Duke is on 8 life. That is certainly an assailable number. A lot needs to go right for that to happen, though. A lot of spiders in play for Duke here. And on top of that, he's got a Servant of the Conduit. He's got a Rogue Refiner or 2 in there. And if various of these things get killed off, in principle, he might also have another Aetherworks Marvel activation.
Yeah, I mean, from this board state, really the only thing I can think that Steve's deck can put together is like a Walking Ballista that's activated multiple times over multiple turns to really get a bunch of counters, but he just doesn't have nearly enough time to do that. And these black-green decks, again, one of the things they give up on is having that late-game reach to attack the opponent's life total once they've stabilized the board. And sure enough, Reid did stabilize, and that'll be game and match to Reid Duke.
Congratulations to Reid Duke of Team Puzzle Quest. You can see that there's more matches going on in our feature match area, though. We've already had the match of Yoshii Fujita completing. We're going to get a chance to move to our back table now and see Lu Chen Liu against Michael Majors. There it's 2 kind of decks that we're fairly well familiar with. Mardu Vehicles is against Teamer Aetherworks Marvel, this kind of more traditional Aetherworks Marvel deck. And right now, on the left of our screen, we see Liu getting to get stuck in with a whole host of creatures. This is after sideboarding, so that is Archangel Avacyn able to do good work, and it looks like that might be the game being squared up there. 1 apiece between Mike Majors and Yu Chen. Majors, of course, one of the 6 players from Team Genesis still in contention for top 8 after the 2nd draft of a Pro Tour. That's a fantastic performance. You couldn't ask for better than that.
Yeah, truly amazing, truly amazing. Hats off to Genesis and their team. A bunch of strong players, combination of American and European pros there. And it's awesome to see them doing so well here this weekend. And, good luck to them in keeping up that awesome job.
It looks like actually this is the last match that we have going on in our feature match area. Everything else kind of closing out now. So we're going to have a little bit of time before the decider happens there. I think that Mike Majors just having a little comfort break before he has to go back into battle against Lu Chen Yu. So in the meantime, let's take a little look at the deck list that we've got going on here. See if we can perhaps prepare you guys for exactly what we're going to see here. I think that of the 2 decks, these are both fairly familiar ones. For the Mardu Vehicles deck of Liu, it's working off a lot of what we've seen from Kaladesh, but there are a few new additions from Amonkhet that are kind of interesting. 1 Cut to Ribbons is something that I'm kind of excited by, a straightforward removal spell with a great deal of upside.
Yeah, it's a card we've seen show up a little bit in open tournaments throughout the past couple weekends as one of the new innovations for Mardu Vehicles here. It's just a great, it's a great utility spell, good removal spell, and then having a Ribbons in your graveyard means that if the game does go long, you have an extra way to attack your opponent's life total. Perhaps you flood it out on land, or they're just taking a long time to kill you, and each land you draw just represents 1 extra life that your opponent's going to lose there.
And even though I would have thought if you told me 6 months ago that, or maybe a little less, that Mardu Vehicles couldn't have had a better mana base, could have had a better base, I wouldn't have believed you. Canyon Slough in there, just gradually just meaning you have even more ways of making sure that your mana is perfect when you need it to be, and in this case, if it's already perfect enough, draw an extra card off it.
Yeah, not only do the cycle lands sometimes let you go up an additional land, beyond what you would normally play, which is how some folks are using them, but Also, just having an extra dual land option means that you can reconfigure your basic lands a little bit and maybe make sure, if you have an extra Canyon Slough in your deck, that means you can have an extra Plains, and that's one extra source that can cast Toolcraft Exemplar or 3-Bit Inspector on turn 1, for example.
Now, looking across on the other side of things, Mike Major's list, one of the things that I think characterizes the different builds of Aetherworks Marvel that different teams have brought along is once you get past Ulamog's kind of a fixture. What are the other threats that you're powering out with your Aetherworks Marvel deck? How reasonable is it to think about just simply casting them? And what do they do to impact the board if you happen to not be able to put a big legendary Eldrazi Titan into play? And for Michael Majors, the big addition is there are a full 4 copies of Chandra Flamecaller.
Yeah, I've heard actually a couple people talk about this card as just a way to fight zombies, a way to sweep away small creatures. If for example, mono-white humans or red-white humans shows up a little bit more than folks expected. But yeah, this is a card that's been forgotten somewhat in Standard. It is from Oath of the Gatewatch. Battle for Zendikar block, of course, still in Standard. Alongside Ulamog here, showing up in the deck list here. And yeah, Chandra Flamecaller, just an excellent thing to hit off of Aetherworks Marvel, and just a good value card because a lot of the cards in this deck are here just to enable the Marvel. As is typically common with combo decks, you have sort of a lot of supplemental cards. Chandra Flamecaller can let you throw those away in the late game and look for something more impactful, like an Ulamog that you're able to cast, or Rogue Refiners to just keep the engine flowing, as it were. And you asked the question of how are Aetherworks Marvel decks handling if they can't hit Ulamog reliably, or for the times that they can't hit Ulamog off of Marvel. And the answer is that there's a wide variety of different ways that players are approaching this. Some players are using Niss's Renewal to actually just ramp up and try to hard cast Ulamog. Other players, like Reid that we just saw, are going for more of a mid-range strategy where you have things like Gear Hulk and Demon of Dark schemes to hit. So there's really quite a wide variety, and honestly, Chandra Flamecaller is one of my favorite ones that I've seen so far, so I'm really excited to see that inclusion in this deck list.
And these players are working after sideboarding, so there's a few extra options available there. If Mike Majors maybe wants to go up even further on his mass removal, he can perhaps work with Sweltering Suns. He's also got Confiscation Coup going on there, and Manglehorn, of course, the creature that is also a removal spell for some of the most potent threats in Liu Liu's list. Because we do have the full 4 Heart of Kiran, 4 Scrap Heap Scrounger. It does not look like we have Magma Spray anywhere in the 75 of Majors, so he's not going to have the easiest way of dealing with a Scrap Heap Scrounger, but sometimes a Manglehorn just putting it down and meaning it comes into play tapped is enough to kind of make life a little bit trickier.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, these Temur Aetherwork decks, especially the way that Michael Majors has built his deck, is just trying to go over the top, right? So you don't really care that a Scrap Heap Scrounger might recur from the graveyard a couple times. When you need to chump block it with a Rogue Refiner, you just go ahead and do that and just hope to go over the top and get that Ulamog out and close the game out before the recursion aspect is really a huge problem for you.
So the players here just preparing themselves as they go through the final game, checking the old sideboards and making sure that they've got an optimal configuration for the deciding game. Chandra Torture Defiant in the sideboard for Liu, along with a variety of other Planeswalkers. It's something that we saw a little bit at the last Pro Tour, that the Planeswalker plan in the sideboard was one of the favoured sideboarding plans of vehicles, and meant that it could kind of turn into a more of a sort of value Planeswalker control deck, because there is a lot of quality removal available to vehicles if you want to use it.
Yeah, sometimes the way the Mardu vehicles works is they start with their main deck configuration, which is just hyper efficient aggression, artifact synergies, things like that, and then sometimes for games 2 and 3 they almost universally sideboard into just kind of being a more mid-rangey Planeswalker heavy, more value type deck, and the reason for that is that you're kind of moving away from the hyper-efficient version of the deck that's more attackable post-sideboard, as your opponent might bring in artifact removal and magma sprays and so on and so forth, and moving to something that's more resilient and hard to attack in the form of the Planeswalkers. Now, it may be that Liu decides not to take that approach for this particular matchup, because Michael Majors' deck looks like it's very much slanted toward just going all in on the Aetherworks combo here, either trying to get Ulamog or Chandra Flamecaller onto the battlefield, and it may just be that Liu's best plan is just to remain in the hyper-efficient configuration and just try to run over Michael Majors, before he can have time to set up his combinations.
All right, these players hoping for a solid 7. Of course, with the Marvel deck, it is quite possible to have an opening 7 that, even with lands and spells, sometimes feels like a mulligan, if, as we saw in the last round, Ulamog is sat in hand. But at the same time, there are lots of powerful cards that at least mean that there's the potential for Mike Majors to ramp up, even if that does happen. But players drawing their opening hands now, let's see how they get on with it. Well, we spoke at the last Pro Tour of the power of the 1-2-3 from a vehicles deck. If you can get down maybe a Toolcraft Exemplar on turn 1, followed by a Heart of Kiran or similar, looks like that is going to be possible for you here. But in the meantime, Attune with Ether coming from Mike Majors.
Looks like both players starting off with quite good hands there. I did see a turn 1 Toolcraft Exemplar into turn 2 Scrap Heap Scrounger from Yu-Chen Liu. Mike Majors, on the other hand, starting off with Attune to Aether. So in some sense, both of these decks starting with their very best turn 1 plays. We'll take a look at each player's hand and see how the next couple turns are going to develop in just a moment as we get those populated with our spotters down there on the floor. But in the meantime, it looks like we're off to the races here, Tim. This could be a very good game.
Spyblafka now there coming down for Majors. Just keeping mana up for now. That not what the vehicles deck's all about, though. Gets stuck in for 3 here. There's Harness Lightning. That's the reason for that mana being kept up.
Wow. Huge turn 3 play there from Michael Majors. That is Manglehorn taking out Heart of Kiran. Michael Majors is off to a great start here against also a great start from Yu-Chen Liu. I mean, turn 1 Toolcraft Exemplar into turn 2 Heart of Kiran, and yet Yu-Chen Liu is untapping with nothing on the battlefield on turn 3, adding simply a Thraben Inspector here and probably another Scrap Heap Scrounger.
And that clue does come into play tapped, along with a tapped Scrap Heap Scrounger. So Manglehorn, in addition to dealing with the Heart of Kiran, pretty certainly the best target for Manglehorn in this matchup. Also going to get a chance to attack in here without reasonable blockers for Liu Yu-Chen. A little bit of extra energy there from Rogue Refiner. Already up to a full 6 energy because it didn't take too much energy to deal with that Toolcraft Exemplar early doors from Harness Lightning.
And I have to say, I really like the way this game has started here for Michael Majors. That early sequence of Harness Lightning into Manglehorn. He's got a couple creatures now back on defense. He can trade with that Scrap Heap Scrounger even a couple times if he needs to, just to get that breathing room. And we did see a copy of Chandra Flamecaller waiting in Michael Majors' hands. So if he can get up to that, that's just going to be a huge, power increase into what Michael's deck is capable of. So we'll see what Liu Yu-Chen can fire back with here on his turn 4.
Already 4 lands for Michael Majors. We know there's 1 more in hand for him, so everything that he needs kind of coming together here. Scrap Heap Scrounger considering getting stuck in here. It's not going to be busy blocking, so there's a strong argument to say he might as well be busy attacking, and does trade off with Manglehorn.
And you can see Michael trading off there. He's he's at 20 life still, so he didn't need to block the Scrap Heap Scrounger there. But by blocking, he's just inviting Liu Yu-Chen to just keep spending mana and spending resources in terms of cards from his graveyard to keep bringing those Scrap Heap Scroungers back onto the battlefield. And given that Liu still has a bunch of cards in his hand, Michael's happy just going ahead and taxing that mana and getting the Scrap Heap Scrounger off the battlefield temporarily, just to buy more time, more breathing room to get up to things like Chandra Flamecaller, and eventually maybe find out Aetherworks Marvel, look for Ulamog. Oh, and find Aetherworks Marvel he has. There it is, coming down already with 7 energy to play with. So things looking quite good here for Michael Majors.
Getting ready with the advantage bar just as soon as that Aetherworks Marvel gets tapped. We know that there's already 1 Ulamog and 1 Chandra not left in the deck. Still a good, happy number of hits, though. There is Unlicensed Disintegration in hand for Liu Yu-Chen, and that's one of those cards that is sometimes very, very impactful indeed. Deal with a key creature, plus, if there's a Planeswalker in play especially, get that damage on through. With Majors at 20 life, the damage not quite as exciting. Release the Gremlins. You're basically priced into using it here, but you know that your opponent's likely to get, they're going to get something off that Marvel on the way out anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of an awkward situation for Liu Yuchen. Like, he can tap 3 of his 4 lands to cast Release the Gremlin, make a 2/2, but Michael Majors is still going to be able to activate the Aetherworks Marvel anyway. You know, so that's not really like a great use of his resources there. Goes ahead and adds the Heart of Kirin instead. I think he's just going to accept that, yep, you're going to get that 1 activation off Marvel no matter what I do. You already have enough energy. I'm going to hope that A, you don't hit something really powerful off this, and B, that you don't have a good way to replenish your energy and activate it again next turn, because, you know, frankly, I think that is Liu Yuchen's path to victory here in this game.
So Yuchen with 2 mana up, we know that basically that's only going to be good for the clue that's in play, at least for now. And Mike Majors, he's having a good old look at 6 cards, which are, I mean, there's 1 powerful card in these 6, and 5 that are, to my mind, not nearly as powerful. However, it is one that he also has a copy of in hand. He does go for the Chandra Flamecaller. The rest going on the bottom. Well, a Virtuoso there, the draw for Michael Majors.
So Michael has a ton of options here this turn. You know, he can use Chandra's 0, exchange the cards in his hand for that many +1. That's going to give him tons of options here. But he does actually have a couple decent cards in his hand he may want to just go ahead and deploy before he activates that Chandra. He's got a Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot and a Whirler Virtuoso. Those are going to be nice sources of energy for him, give his life total a nice little buffer here, get some chump blockers to throw in the way, and protect Chandra for a turn. And now he might go ahead and just exchange the cards in hand for 3 new ones. Does go ahead and do that. Gets rid of a redundant Chandra Flamecaller and an Ulamog, which, you know, is not very valuable in his hand right now. Picks up 3 new cards and has another activation of Aetherworks Marvel waiting for him here. So he's in really, really good shape.
Now, this is a Chandra Flamecaller that is under a little bit of pressure. There are a number of ways that Yuchen can attack it. However, with Michael Majors on 23 life, with as many threats in play as he already has, or threat, I guess that the Marvel counts as a threat of a threat. There's a lot of different things that Yuchen needs to deal with in order to really get a jump on this game. And when we look at the amount of time left in this game, he's got to start worrying about actually closing things out. 23 life is a bit of a hill for him to climb.
Yeah, indeed, that's true. And whether you mean actual time on the clock, Tim, or just time in terms of how long he has before Michael Majors absolutely locks up this game with that Aetherworks Marvel, the answer is still the same. Liu Yuchen has got to get moving here. He's got to apply some pressure. And the trouble is, yeah, he can send that Heart of Kirin in and try to take out Chandra Flamecaller, but then maybe a Thopter is going to get in the way from the Whirler Virtuoso. So the path is not clear-cut for him. He does decide to go with a Release the Gremlins here on Aetherworks Marvel. That's going to give Michael Majors opportunity to get one last activation in here with the Marvel. Now, it's important to note he could also even find another copy of Marvel here off of the first one. Looks like he did not, but that is sometimes an option that comes up. So it looks like actually a fairly weak spin of the Marvel here. I didn't see anything super awesome in there. I think a Rogue Refiner, was it, that he selected?
Yes, I believe so. Super awesome, a technical term for R&D for the cards that most frequently seem to end up at Mythic. I'm the ones that make a huge impact on the board. Rogue Refiner, relatively small impact, some energy, an extra card for Michael Majors. There was a little bit of an extension just due to a pause, so we got that clock updated for you on the screen there. A little under 7 minutes left on this round. Neither of these players looking to pick up an unintentional draw at this point. Both of them have every reason to be thinking about the potential for a top 8 berth here.
So in comes Heart of Kirin and Scrap Heap Scrounger. I think they're both directed at Chandra, actually. Now, Michael Majors can make a Thopter with Whirler Virtuoso if he wants to get in the way of the Heart of Kirin.
Well, one thing that he might be thinking about is the card that he drew off his Rogue Refiner, because looking at Michael Majors' hand now, there is another Aetherworks Marvel in there, and that changes the face a little bit of what he might want to do in these next couple of turns.
Yeah, it may be that he just wants to save up his energy. He doesn't really care about Chandra, not necessarily. But yeah, he does actually go ahead with that line of play. Sets the Rogue Refiner in front of the Scrap Heap Scrounger and a Thopter in front of Heart of Kirin. It does reduce his energy total, puts him farther away from another Aetherworks Marvel activation, but you know, he does have on board that Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot. He's got an Attune with Ether in hand, so he's got plenty of ways to recoup his energy. It's just going to take him a little bit of time.
Yeah, Mage's there. All sorts of action going on in his hand. And he's managed to whittle down the resources of Liu Yuchen here relatively well. He's not worried too much about live turtles. That will come.
So looking at Michael's position here, he's actually got like two really, really powerful game plans. One is he can actually just play a value game here. He's got a Harness Lightning that can take out of the Heart of Kirin. The Heart of Kirin is really the only thing that's pressuring his board state right now. Without that on the battlefield, his Chandra will be free to remain in play for several turns. The other thing he can do is actually just kind of race toward another Marvel activation, keep looking for Ulamog. But honestly, no matter which way he goes, he's just in such good shape now. He can kind of almost do both at once. You know, just keep grinding, keep his engine humming, you know, gathering more energy, finding more cards, killing off Liu Yuchen's threats, all while working toward, you know, multiple more EtherWorks Marvel activations in the future. So,
-2 there from Chandra, able to kill off everything but the Heart of Kirin in terms of creatures or pseudo-creatures on Liu Yuchen's side of the board. And it's a little ironic that when we're talking about engines being humming, it's not the vehicles deck that's doing it. Will Virtuoso getting stuck in there, joined by a friend, bringing along a little bit more energy, and a couple of mana still up for Michael Majors. He can potentially use that Puzzle Knot if he wants to. I mean, there's another Harness Lightning to think about.
the way I think of a game like this, Tim, if you ever played like one of those old real-time strategy games, you know, like StarCraft or something like that, this is the equivalent of like you've got your base built out, you're on like tier 3 of your technology, you have all your units unlocked, your decks, you know, your base is just doing everything, and then your opponent still just has like their barracks making like one Marine at a time or whatever. It's just a clear like technology gap as far as what these two decks are doing at this stage of the game.
I mean, it's time to pull the trigger on License Disintegration, and it's a pretty potent one at that. Is able to deal with Chandra now that she's down to just 2 loyalty after taking her minus ability previously. But we can see there that in terms of what's going on for Liu, the only real excitement is that there are still some Scrap Heap Scroungers in the graveyard. Not too many other creatures for them to eat, though.
Here comes a Tune with Ether, refilling some energy for Mike Majors. Might see now that next copy of EtherWorks Marvel come out.
I mean, I'm going to dial back Major's advantage just a touch here, because he doesn't actually have as many threats on the battlefield now. He just has the potential to make them with all of that energy going on.
Yeah, it is true that Unlicensed Disintegration taking out Chandra last turn was a big swing there, but you know, as things stand still, EtherWorks Marvel just really powerful to have on the battlefield against an opponent that's run out of steam. You know, Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot threatening to gather more energy, so really excited to see what this next turn or two is going to shape up like for Mike Majors. Again, you know, sometimes you just totally miss with Marvel once or even twice in a row. It does happen. It can happen. But here we go, spinning the wheel, as it were. Let's see what Mike Majors can come up with.
Yeah, when both players are in top deck mode, the person that gets to look at an additional 6 cards in order to find something has to be in good shape. And there's Ulamog. All right, you can go back to the advantage bar now, Ian. I think that we may have seen enough here. Big advantage to Mike Majors, able to take his pick of permanents to get rid of on Liu Yuchen's side of the board here. Ulamog does count as being cast, so that cast trigger means that 2 permanents will be able to be exiled.
Oh, here comes Archangel Avacyn.
And we saw there Michael Majors taking out the black mana sources of Liu Yuchen, those stranding the Scrap Heap Scroungers in his graveyard, at least for now. Majors with enough energy both in play and kind of stored up in that Puzzle Knot that he can spin the wheel yet again. On 20 life, how much does he really need to worry about this Archangel Avacyn?
Not very much, you know, in terms of protecting his own life total. You know, I think he still has. Does he still have the Whirler Virtuoso in the battlefield too?
He does, yes.
So yeah, he can make some Thopters to get in the way if he really needs to. But yeah, from here on out, I mean, I think it's just going to be swinging with the Ulamog a couple times. You know, he might be thinking about something like Declaration in Stone as an answer to the Ulamog that could have come out of the sideboard potentially, but that's not a super common card to see out of Martyr Vehicles. You know, nor is it necessarily something that Liu Yuchen would bring in here. So I mean, by and large, I think the coast is clear, and it's just going to be a matter of swinging a couple times with Ulamog. There's not too much else that I can see coming out here for Liu Yuchen. I mean, you could argue something like a Heart of Kira next turn, raising his, his power in the air to 8 is potentially something that could turn into a race, but I don't think the math really works out there, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, early doors we saw Michael Majors protecting his life total with blocks and trades with Scrap Heap Scrounger, and that ended up being a fine choice. He's not hurting for life in the slightest, and Scrap Heap Scroungers have really not found themselves brought back all too often in the entirety of this game.
And here's a pretty cool one. Ether Meltdown comes out on Archangel Abyssin there, reducing her power by 4, adding a couple more energy for Michael Majors.
Majors up to the magic 6 energy. That's either 2 Thopters or 1 activation of Aetherworks Marvel. Time has now been called, we believe. We're just going to double check exactly the turn count. This is turn 0. So a little consideration will be, of course, can this game be closed out in 5 turns? I think that my suggestion is almost certainly.
Yeah, I would think so. You know, depending on where Michael's at with energy, he can even just start making a couple Thopters each turn as well and just kind of swarming around Liu Yuchen's defenses. The danger, of course, would be that Ulamog gets chump blocked a couple times and isn't able to quite finish things down. But I think as it stands, Majors gets at least 2 more attacks, which is going to be 40 more cards anyway, so Liu Yuchen gets decked. And yeah, sure enough, that'll be everything it takes to put that game and match away from Michael Majors.
A strong showing once more for Team Genesis. Michael Majors picking up the win there. Took a little bit of time to get there, but you know what? It's not about how quick you win the game. It's just that you're able to do so. And Team Genesis just rocking and rolling through this tournament. Before this round, all 6 of them in contention for top 8. We know that, well, Mike Majors has done no harm whatsoever to his chances there. I'm sure that the team will be briefly getting together to talk about how their rounds went, but we can already see players walking around the room. They're getting ready because that is the end of our round 12 here at Pro Tour Amonkhet, and very shortly we will be able to get on to our next round of Standard, beginning to close in on that top 8 now. The butterflies will be in the stomachs of these players because this is what they've been working toward for months practicing of this format. But for now, this is the end of round 12, so we'll be back soon with more magic after these messages.
Welcome back to the news desk. Maria Bartholdi alongside Rich Hagan, and we've got a deck tech up for you with our very own Luis Scott Vargas and Reid Duke.